couple of weeks ago, I wanted to have a Bruce Springsteen moment. Bruce Springsteen, if we don't know his music too well, he spends a lot of time in cars. And sometimes on motorcycles, but we know that's not safe, so mostly it's cars. In fact, he has a whole album that some might argue is his one big long road trip from track one to the very end. It's a lot of time driving around, wafting in nostalgia and imagining the future and seeing our lives through the lens of a windshield. One of Bruce Springsteen's most famous songs, at least from the radio standpoint, is called My Hometown. If you don't know that song, it is in essence a song sung in the voice of a middle-aged man who, in the first verses, is remembering as a child sitting on his dad's lap driving through his hometown. The last verses are him as a middle-aged man, now with a kid of his own, driving through his hometown. So a couple of weeks ago, I was hoping to have a Bruce Springsteen moment. I was going back home. I was going to go hang out with some high school friends. We haven't been together in years. I can't remember the last time that all four of us were in the same spot at the same time. So I had time, they all had made time, and we were going to get together. Now my parents happened to be on a trip, so they were away, so I was going to be staying in my house that I grew up in. And in a weird sort of way, I'm kind of Airbnb-ing the house where I grew up, but I'm there by myself, and also there by itself is my dad's 67 Camaro. So, we're going for a drive. And I knew this, obviously, so I'd been starting to think about, where are you going to go? Like, where are you going to take the car? You have all this time and all this freedom. And so I started thinking about Stagecoach Trail, and I started thinking about driving up around Hazel Green and all these county back roads and winding roads that I used to take when I was a teenager. And I was going to drive past the barns and the buildings and the landscapes and the signposts of my youth. And it was going to be a beautiful day of nostalgia. And that kind of remember when. It's going to be those moments. It's going to be in my dad's car. I mean, this is nothing but a Bruce Springsteen song. And it was going to be a great day. And I had all these expectations and all these assumptions and all these built-up goals about this driving experience and hanging out with my friends. So Friday night I went up there, hung out with my friends. We had a blast. It was so much fun, talked about the past, talked about our kids, all the things you do as grown adults sitting around a table. Next day I had time in my hands, and that's when I was going to take the car, so I took it for that drive, that epic drive that I had mapped out in my head. Now you can probably presume where this is going. It wasn't necessarily epic. Now nothing bad happened, but some of the roads that I wanted to take, I couldn't because they were under construction, or there was a whole bunch of gravel and tailings, and I'm not going to take my dad's car down that. There was one particular road that I hoped to go down, but I got stuck behind traffic, and well, that kind of kills the vibe. So I got off that road and went down another one. I took this one road that I had in the back of my mind, like I remember it being a shortcut between where I grew up in Galena, which is the next town east. And I took that road with my dad's car and came to find out that that car is utterly dangerous and has all these incredible blind turns in it. And I don't know why I would think that it was a shortcut, because it took like 10 minutes longer. So I had all these expectations, but they didn't quite pan out. Still backed the car into the garage, and it was fine. I mean, it was a drive, but it was fine. But it wasn't entirely what I hoped it would be. In our reading for today, we are in the first letter to the Corinthians. Bear with me for just a moment as I become a bit of a Bible nerd. If we do a deep dive into a Bible study of the first letter to the Corinthians, we would come to chapter 5, and we would see in chapter 5 that Paul makes reference to another letter that he's already written to the Corinthian church, which means that the first letter to the Corinthians is actually the second letter to the Corinthians, and the second letter to the Corinthians is actually, scholars believe, a mashup of at least 2, maybe 3 other letters. The only reason why I note that is because this means Paul wrote a whole bunch of letters to this one congregation, because the Corinthian church was having issues. They were challenged, if you will, with figuring out how they were going to organize themselves and how they were going to remember that they were centered on Christ. The Corinthian church, of course, is in Corinth. Corinth is, in that time, a metropolitan area. So there's a whole lot going on. It would have been beautiful museums and theater and art, beautiful fabrics, and all the wealth would have been in the city, and of course all the destitute poverty. Everything about the world would have been in this one city. People of different ethnicities, people of different races, people of different religious backgrounds. It's all there, and somehow Paul, I guess we could argue the Holy Spirit, was able to bring a fraction and representation of all these diverging groups into one space. Now, one could imagine when you bring a whole bunch of different people who don't know each other and come from different backgrounds into one space, maybe there's going to be conflict. At the very least, there's going to be disagreement and maybe some disillusion. In verse 12 of our reading for today, we get a glimpse of what's going on in the Corinthian church, why maybe Paul kept sending all these letters. Paul writes, "What I mean is this, that each one of you says, 'I belong to Paul, I belong to Apollos, I belong to Cephas, I belong to Christ.' Has Christ been divided? Was Paul crucified for you, or were you baptized in Paul's name?" Well, we know who Paul is, we know who Jesus is. Apollos and Cephas, we don't know who they are, but it's presumed that they're probably, well, in our language, they're something like committee leaders. They have a committee, they have their group, and their group is beginning to develop some expectations, some assumptions, some goals about how the congregation is going to operate, and needless to say, there seems to be some disagreement amongst these groups. But you know what? The Corinthian church was 2,000 years ago. Let's get out of history. Let's hang out right here. We don't have to awkwardly look at each other because I know that we're kind of introverts and Lutherans don't always do that. But I want you to imagine the people who you are worshiping with this morning. Like these folks who are in front of you and behind you. And I want you to think to yourself, where else you would get to know any one of these people if you hadn't met them here. Now it's true, even as I look around, some of us share school experiences, some of us are teachers, some of us maybe would meet together at Malarkey's or the Idle Hour or something like that. Maybe we would bump into each other at Sullivan's, maybe down at Super Value, who knows. We might have those opportunities, maybe at a synod event, we might have a chance to sit at a table. But the reality is for most of us, without this space, without Christ centering us and drawing us in together, sometimes admittedly kicking and screaming, and we have no idea why we're here. But for some reason that we can't articulate, God got all of you here. And we come from diverging backgrounds. Some of us have lived in this community multi-generationally. Some of us are brand new. Some of us are brand new to this space. And yet God drew us in together with all of our gifts and with all of our abilities, and we are centered on Christ. Now, Trinity isn't like Corinth. It's not like we have a whole bunch of conflict we got to deal with. And yet every single one of us will come into this space with expectations. We are all going to come here with our goals, with our aspirations, with our assumptions about how church should be, assumptions about maybe how this church operates, maybe assumptions about where this church should be. We all come here with goals. Maybe we come here to form relationships. Maybe we come here to meet new people. Maybe we come here because we have something in our mind that we want to achieve, and we know we can't do it by ourselves, but we know that if we're around a group of like-minded people, maybe we can organize together and accomplish that goal. We all come here with goals and expectations. And when we come into a space with goals and expectations, well, we know how what's going to happen. At some point, we will be disappointed. At some point, we are going to be disillusioned. At some point, we are going to be frustrated. And when we become frustrated and disillusioned and disappointed by the way the church is working compared to the way that we thought it might function, we are then prone, because this is what humans do, to begin to notice the differences and the divides that exist between us, because we are a diverging group of people. We come from so many backgrounds and so many different experiences, so many goals and so many life choices. And yet we're all here centered on Christ. And that's where Paul tries to take the Corinthian church. Letter after letter after letter, sermon after sermon, keeps trying to draw the Corinthian church to remember that we have been pulled together by Christ's love and grace. That every single one of us here has been forgiven by the same God. Every single one of us here has been granted the same grace. Every single one of us here has been loved equally and is loved daily equally by God. I say that in this space where we are all going to nod and we're all going to agree and we're going to sing the songs and we're going to offer the prayers and we're going to give thanks. So where Paul really takes us and takes the Corinthian church is not necessarily here on a Saturday night or a Sunday morning where that's all kind of expected and we all kind of get along. Where we will be encountered by the cross is more likely out there. When we go to a meet, when we go to a soccer match, when we go to a school event, when we meet somebody at Malarkey's, maybe right after today you are going to go out to eat for breakfast, you're going to go to Sunrise or the Campus Cafe or Bella's or your favorite spot. And you're going to sit down and you're going to be enjoying your meal, and some person 2 tables back is going to be spouting off louder than we would prefer about ways that the world works that are totally different and totally anathema to the way that we understand the world. And something about us would like to just get up and go over there and just remind them that there are different ways for the world to work, and actually your way is wrong. And let me tell you why. You've had that temptation, because I've had that temptation. We are prone to see the differences. Now, it doesn't mean we're going to be walking in the world utterly pacifist, that we should be steamrolled by other ideas. There are destructive words. There are hateful words. There are anti-grace words that float all around our community, and we've heard them and we've experienced them. We've done the best we can to speak against them because we are called to do that. We are also called by God through Christ, who claims every single one of us by grace and love, to see God at work in the person who we will encounter. The people who are different from us, the people who vote different from us, the people who live different from us, people who love different from us, people who look different from us, people who come from differing, diverging backgrounds from what we have ever experienced in our lives. God creates every person in God's image. This is where we are encountered by the cross. When we walk in the world acknowledging differences and recognizing differences and living into those divides. Paul is trying to call and pull the Corinthian church back together and reorganize us again. Remind us that we are drawn together by Christ. The reality is, for most of us here, we would probably not know each other. This space would not exist without Christ. And of course, that is a gift, because we get to experience grace, and we get to experience a glimpse of the diversity of God's creative energy in the world. This space, and the other spaces in this community, and the other spaces in Oregon, all around, this space is designed by God to be a glimpse of God's kingdom, how God operates in the world. You and I, then, oriented by the cross, fed at this table, washed in these waters, equally loved by grace and loved by Christ. We are then called on to take this good news, to take this reflection of Christ's light and love out into the world, so that when we encounter our neighbors, maybe not all the time, but maybe, we will glimpse the image of God in others. Amen.